had done have developed their nuclear energy 30 years ago. They now have the cheapest and most reliable electricity in Europe. And I think we would like to be in that position, but we're not. And in the short term, it will have to be gas-fired turbines. They're the only ones we can build quickly enough to fill that sort of energy gap. But that energy gap isn't going to go away in 2 or 3 years. We've got a lot of our old coal capacity coming offline in the course of the next few years, a lot of it because of European Union regulations. Our second-generation nuclear stations will be running at the end of their lives soon. We need to replace it with something. Paul is absolutely right. Nuclear and indeed renewables are an enormous challenge for a marketplace because renewables also are extremely expensive to build compared per kilowatt installed. As I say, they have the extra challenge that of the intermittency, and what we're seeing in the United Kingdom is that the sort of distortion of the market you have to do to manage renewables is now causing a lot of concerns. We'll be subsidising renewables in the year 2020 roughly to the tune of a free Hinkley Point C 3,000 megawatt nuclear station every year. And I think that's starting to be unsustainable. And nuclear, we've just seen what they call the strike price for the other power sources. Nuclear is clearly the cheapest of the low carbon energy. We have to decide at some point soon, do we want to reduce carbon emissions or not? And if we do, we're going to have to pay for it.
But in your view, is this more about reducing carbon emissions and being a green policy as such, or simply securing energy, the energy future of the United Kingdom, and being less reliant on gas? Which is more important?
I think the greenhouse gas is the probably the main argument here. Certainly the United Kingdom was a gas exporter 10 years ago. We're now not, and our gas reserves are running very short. My own view is that there are plenty of countries out there wanting to sell gas, certainly at the moment. We have had concerns that occasionally, for example, disputes, as Sergei will know, between Gazprom and Ukraine have led to Russia limiting supplies and knock-on effects to Western Europe. But there are other gas suppliers in the world. And I think if we weren't worried about climate change, I think we'd just abandon all of the market support for renewables and nuclear and let them compete, and nobody would be building renewables or nuclear. We'd just be building gas. But I think if we did get to that point, security would start to be an issue. But this comes back to the challenge. And incidentally, there's a very interesting study by engineering firm Bentech in Colorado in the States. Colorado has largely wind and coal for its electricity. Their calculations are that because you have to crank the coal stations up and down as the wind goes down and up to keep supplies constant, that introduces thermal inefficiencies into the coal station. A bit like when you're driving your car around town. The stop-start driving around the town gives you much higher emissions and much lower mileage per litre of petrol than if you're just on an ordinary run out on the motorways at a constant speed. Their calculation seems to be that actually they'd reduce their carbon emissions if they just switch the wind farms off and just use the coal stations in the most efficient way possible. So in Colorado, anybody who says that wind is a very expensive way of cutting greenhouse gases is wrong. It's actually an extremely expensive way of increasing greenhouse gas emissions.
Paul Gunter, can I get your response to that?
Well, clearly, I think that what we're seeing right now is a growing renewable energy through wind power, where you begin to address intermittency by linking wind farms where the wind is blowing somewhere all the time, and thereby increasing the efficiency of transmission to essentially what the Department of Energy has recognized as a potential base load. So, we're building the wind industry here in the United States, and it's attracting private investment, which I think is the big difference between renewables and nuclear power, where you essentially require a state-run industry, and in UK's instance, it's going to be foreign owned and dominated is a big concern. So, and that's clearly one of the factors in here in the United States, where Electricité de France sought to build a new nuclear power plant here in Maryland, very close to Washington, D.C., and but when the actual economics bore out to address, when how we're going to license these things, the local utility, Constellation Energy, backed out, leaving EDF the sole owner. And that's against the Atomic Energy Act here in the United States. We prohibit foreign ownership, control, and domination of nuclear power. And so the application was abandoned. And I think that particularly in a world of growing cybersecurity, that nation states still need to look at how they're going to secure their energy infrastructure, and to become increasingly reliant upon an inherently dangerous technology that's even vulnerable to cyber attack. I think that this should play more a dominant role in determining UK's energy security.
I'd like to get the view actually of Sergei Vakulenko, who's the head of Gazprom Neft's strategic planning department, just on the idea of the sovereignty and Paul Gunter sort of refers there to a kind of handing over of sovereignty of Britain's energy future to foreign interests, and in this case it's EDF, also Chinese investors. I mean, do you see it that way? Do you think it's a handing over of sovereignty just because it requires foreign expertise and money to get it built?
No, I don't really think so. The station is going to be on the UK soil, is going to be operating under UK laws, and most likely it would be operated by UK nationals, and it would be inspected by UK inspectors of all sorts. And if there is a threat, a concern of cybersecurity, cyber threat, and so on, well, nothing precludes appropriate UK governing bodies of installing firewalls, internet traffic filters, and what's not, to save this particular power plant from the threat. Just the same way as UK border patrols control borders around the UK. I would like to go back a little bit and discuss the safety issue. Of course, we like to, it's a common adage, it's a common impression that nuclear stations or other large installations of that sort are very inherently dangerous. However, there is an interesting conundrum of public perception of safety. Things like Chernobyl, a 3 Mile Island, or Fukushima incidents grab the headlines, they grab the attention of the public. But if you compare the impact of these really terrible disasters, but the disasters that happen usually once in 20 years, to low-level but persistent damage impact of other forms of energy generation, the jury would be out, which creates higher impact. And if we talk of our beloved wind, nevertheless, wind turbines are eyesores on landscapes. Wind turbines cause vibration. Wind turbines do take over some land and so on. So, yes, we need to take into account security and safety issues of large installations like nuclear. We have to keep in mind what are we going to do with nuclear waste, but we also have to understand that all other forms of energy generation do have their impact on the environment, safety, and so on. And if they are low level and less noticeable day after day, it doesn't necessarily mean that over the long time their cumulative impact is low.
Malcolm Grimston, can I get your reaction to that? I mean, do you think that incidents like Fukushima, which has been invoked there, as well as Chernobyl, unfairly skew the argument over nuclear safety? These are once-in-a-generation incidents, according to Sergei there. Would you agree with that?
All the evidence backs up what Sergei's just said. There's a huge study done in Europe by Extern-E, which is part of the research department of the European Union, which demonstrate that nuclear energy is the safest of the energy technologies that we've yet to come up with. I mean, clearly, major accidents don't just have a radiological consequence. Actually, nobody has or will die from radiation as a result of Fukushima. But the evacuation has been an extremely serious effect on people's lives, and there were very clear evidence that a number of people have died as a direct result of the evacuation. And that's an effect of nuclear that we certainly have to.
Radiation doesn't kill.
The levels of radiation, even among the workers received at Fukushima, will not be enough to cause any death. There are some deaths at Chernobyl, both among those who were on site and youngsters who got thyroid cancer as a result there, caused by the Chernobyl accident. But Chernobyl is the only accident which has had any demonstrable off-site consequences. We should bear in mind that Fukushima was a 40-year-old plant which was hit by a 15-metre tsunami. There are many areas of the world where modern plants, in effect, had already gone through all of the lessons of a Fukushima-type event before it had happened.
But isn't that the point? It was such a freak. It was such a freak accident and a combination of events that was so unusual that there's absolutely no planning for something like that, and something that could happen in 50 years' time, for instance, a once-in-a-generation event such as what happened at Fukushima.
I think one of the fair criticisms of the Japanese authorities, who were just too cosy with their nuclear industry, I think the regulators there over many years had simply not done their job there, was that they should have actually. There was plenty of evidence that a tsunami of that size was a possibility, and the plant should have been designed against that. But no technology is entirely without risks. I think, as Sergei says, you have to look at the total cycle there, and even leaving out the deaths caused by climate change, nuclear energy as so far is with Fukushima, it was 25 years before Fukushima since we had the previous major incident at Chernobyl. Compared to the damage we are doing to our planet with greenhouse gases on an ongoing basis, I just don't think it's in the same league.
Okay, well, look, I'd definitely like to get Paul Gunter's reaction to that, but I will get that after a short news update with Simon Parker. He has the news.
You're listening to a news update from the Voice of Russia in London. I'm Simon Parker. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has asked the US President Barack Obama for an explanation amid reports that US intelligence agencies have been tapping her mobile phone. The German government has said that if the accusations are proven to be true, it would be a serious breach of trust. The White House has said that the President Obama told Mrs. Merkel that the US was not monitoring her calls and would not in the future. French President François Hollande has called for the issue to be put on the agenda of an EU summit taking place in Brussels, following reports that millions of French calls had also been monitored. Portuguese police have reopened their inquiry into the disappearance of the British girl Madeleine McCann. Portugal's Attorney General said new evidence justified the reopening of the investigation, which was closed by police in 2008. Portuguese police said a review team had been working since March 2011. They've been looking through information from the original investigation, and the process had uncovered potential new lines of inquiry. Democratic allies of President Barack Obama say they are frustrated with aspects of his new signature healthcare law. House Democrats have complained that technical issues with the insurance enrollment websites have overshadowed the law's benefits. Mr. Obama has said technical problems with the site are unacceptable and has pledged they will be fixed. Union leaders in Britain have said they are optimistic after meetings to discuss the future of the Grangemouth petrochemical plant. The union said it had decided to embrace a survival plan put forward by its owners. All 800 were told they would lose their jobs when INEOS announced the closure on Wednesday. Workers had rejected proposals by the firm to end their final salary pension scheme and cut shift allowances. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia from London. We bring you news, features and debate live from 4 till 8 p.m, Mondays to Fridays. Tune in on DAB or online at ruvr.co.uk.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in our weekly link-up with our bureaus in London, Washington and Moscow. My name is Brendan Cole. We're discussing the British government decision to give the go-ahead to the UK's first ever nuclear power station in a generation. This is at Hinkley C plant in Somerset, and we're discussing how this fits into a broader energy mix. Paul Gunter, in Washington, you're Director of Reactor Oversight Project for Beyond Nuclear. I'd be interested in your take on Malcolm Grimston's position there. The fears, I suppose, of the major nuclear incidents in our lifetime, Chernobyl, Fukushima, we can't. They've skewed the debate somewhat. Nuclear energy is actually very safe.
Well, I would just remind everybody that we've had now 5 nuclear meltdowns in the last 35 years. So in terms of probability, there's a very high probability that we will continue to have these consequential nuclear accidents, particularly in an aging industry. But to suggest that to predict that there will be no health consequence from Fukushima just defies the clinical evidence. that chronic low-dose exposure to radiation causes cancer, causes genetic mutations, causes birth defects, causes a whole host of maladies. That's medical evidence, and to put that into context, there is a cancer epidemic worldwide, and I will admit that it's difficult to do a ballistics evaluation on a neutron particle. But if you run the clinical studies and you look at the clinical evidence, that neutron